Good afternoon. My name is Trish Safner. I'm a Yukon Advanced Master Gardener. I'm here in the Thompsonville Community Garden. This afternoon we're going to talk about composting and the importance of it in gardening. I feel very passionate about composting as being a basic element in the gardening process because it adds many nutrients to the soil, organic matter that can help with your plants and growth. What I'm going to talk about today is what composting is all about and how to get the best out of your compost. There are basic elements that you need to know with composting, and those are that you need to have the right amount of nutrients for the microorganisms that are actually causing the composting to occur. So in order to get the right ratio, we start with certain amounts. You can do the composting at your home. We're going to be doing it here at Thompsonville in beds. So the composting becomes a very valuable soil amendment, and it costs very little to make because you're actually recycling what you have in your home, in your kitchen, and in your garden debris. It improves the soil structure, it increases the aeration, it adds moisture, and helps hold nutrients. It contains a wide range of plant nutrients, including trace minerals, which are really important so that you don't have to worry about adding fertilizer at a later point. Adding compost to the soil can actually modify the soil's pH so that you might not even have to add lime. Some compost can actually reduce the incidence of plant diseases, especially those that are soil-borne. It reduces the amount of material entering our waste stream, which is really important, and the increased moisture holding capacity and enriching the soil can reduce the amount of irrigation or water that you need during the summertime. There are 6 elements of compost that are important. The first one is carbon-containing material. So these are things that are more on the dry side, things that are on the brown side. So you would see things like crushed leaves or sawdust, chopped up newspaper, twigs, anything that has very little water content. And the carbon content in the compost is most important because this is actually feeding the microorganisms and giving them energy to break down and decompose the matter. The second important element is nitrogen. Think of nitrogen as the green or more moist component. This is easier to come by because we have a lot of garden waste that we're working with in the garden every day. You also have the kitchen waste at home. So anything like banana peels or eggshells or leftover food scraps before they're eaten. So you wouldn't want to take your leftover salad with salad dressing and put it in, but you would use the components of the salad like lettuces or leaves that you're not eating. The third component is oxygen. Oxygen is fuel, and it's an important part in the composting process. So you don't want to just dump all of the materials on top of each other. You actually want to layer them, and adding in twigs will help allow a little bit of air movement in there. And when you're turning the compost, that also invites air in and helps to feed the microbes as well. Water is the fourth component. You want your compost to be almost like a wrung out sponge as far as moisture content. So rain will come and add moisture to it, but you may have to add water to your compost if it seems really dry. The fifth component is the soil microbes. So they are the fuel engine that is actually breaking down the organic matter that you're feeding it. So it's getting energy from the carbon, it's getting growth capacity from the nitrogen. The water in the air is also very necessary for the soil microbes to do their jobs. And the last component is warm temperatures. So you don't want it to be in an area that's totally shaded or someplace or a very cold spot in your garden. It should get partial sun at least during the daytime. So using those 6 components and adding them in the right ratios, turning it and keeping an eye on it will help you give the most perfect compost that you could. So if I were to put all those statements together and tell you what the equation is for how compost happens, you take yard waste plus oxygen plus water plus the soil organisms, and on the outboard, on the outside, you have carbon dioxide, you have water, you have heat, and eventually you have compost. So if you think of the compost as an active part of your garden, it's happening without you even realizing it, and it's very important to know that there's all different components in the compost. So there's bacteria, there's fungi, there's yeast, and as you get into the composting more, you'll see more beetles in there, you'll see all kinds of worms in there, and they're all adding to the millions and millions of organisms that are helping to break down your compost. So I did talk about green and I talked about brown. Now I want to tell you the ratio. The ratio is actually 30 to 1. So 30 of carbon to 1 of nitrogen. And that seems really hard for people to come by, but a lot of times by mixing up the different types of carbon, you can bring it up to that ratio. So the most important thing is not to just dump all of your compost in one pile and walk away and expect that nature will take care of it. Indeed, nature will take care of it, but it will take a long time. But if you do want your compost to break down in a 6-month or even a 6-week period, it involves a little bit more work. And for that work, you need to layer on the bottom with sticks. You find an area in your garden that is, as I said, in a partly sunny area. Layer sticks on the bottom. That allows air to move up from the bottom, from around the sides, then up into the pile. Then after the layer of sticks, you're going to add your carbon sources. So that could be some old hay, that can be leaves that you have held onto from the fall, chopped up sticks, sawdust, even newspaper that's been shredded is awesome to put down there. Then after that layer of 2 to 3 inches of carbon, you're going to put down a few more sticks, again, adding to the air exchange that will happen, and then add in your green layer. So that would be your kitchen scraps, crushed eggshells, banana peels, even coffee grounds. You can use any type of, green material from the kitchen, and then a few more sticks on top, and then continue that layering of carbon to nitrogen, carbon to nitrogen. So at the end, you come up with a 3 to 4 foot stack, 3 foot wide base of it, and you've got a large area for all the microorganisms to now come in and start to break that down. So we've added the carbon component, we've added the nitrogen component. By adding some moisture to it, either watering or with rain, you're adding the water. By adding the sticks at different levels, you're adding oxygen to add in some air movement in there. The soil microorganisms are already built into the organic matter that you've added in there. So you've added all the components. The only thing now is warmth. The warmth actually happens as the soil microorganisms start to break down and they actually start to heat it up. And the quickest way to add more heat is to add more oxygen and add more movement. And that is done using a spade or a fork, or you can even get a compost turner. And what that does is that changes the movement of all the microorganisms and allows them to get from the bottom where they are all through and starts to break down things faster. So that is just a simple explanation on what composting is all about. Now we're actually going to go over to our compost bins in Thompsonville and show you with signage what the gardeners will be doing throughout the garden season. And hopefully throughout the garden season we'll see that the compost bins are adding up, and we'll show you how they are progressing towards making compost. Okay, we're now at the Thompsonville Community Garden compost bins. We have 5 bins that have been set up so that the community gardeners can then take their garden debris and put it in the appropriate bin. So if we look at bin number 1, this is for green items. Those are all the things that are coming out of the garden beds that the gardeners are not necessarily needing anymore. So these would be maybe little tiny bits of weeds. They might be deadheading off of some of the flowers that they're picking. They may be picking some brown leaves off of their plants, or they might actually be taking the plants out that are spent for the season, like their cool season spinach or their lettuce that's no longer growing. So what they would do is take it out of their garden bed, shake off as much soil off of the roots so that you're keeping the soil where it needs to be in the garden bed, and then bringing it over to either compost bin number 1 or compost bin number 2. The best thing to do is to take it and shred it into smaller pieces so that it breaks down faster. So we're going to work with bin number 1 and bin number 2 for all the green organic matter. Bin number 3, we're actually going to be putting our carbon source in here. And the carbon source will come from the leaves that fall from the trees. The leaves, as well as the sticks, are great sources of carbon, and they'll go into here, again, breaking them into small pieces so they break down faster. Compost bin number 4 is actually where we're going to be making the compost. So we'll be taking components from bin number 1 and 2, the green matter, as well as the brown matter, and mixing it into compost 4. And it's called in the making because we'll take all season to break it down. And bin number 5 will be the finished compost. And when it's finished, it's going to be gorgeous black gold, which will then be used in the garden soil at the end of the season and for next year. The reason why we have 5 bins here is we have 51 garden beds. And so with so many gardeners, you have so much garden debris, and we need to have something at this size. If you were to garden at home, a bin about the size of one of these would be fine. 3 by 5 is plenty room. And as I said earlier, starting from the bottom, you're stacking up sticks, laying down hay or leaves or chopped up newspaper, any carbon or brown component, and then another couple inches of sticks, again adding in the oxygen component, adding in the kitchen garden waste, and then repeating those layers until you get to the top. And then taking a garden fork and mixing those up every maybe once a week, adding in rain if you feel that that's too dry, and that will give you all the components of a compost garden. Okay, so we've had some questions about what can and can't go into the compost pile, which is very important because we want to make sure that we don't have anything in there that would contaminate it. So what I'm going to do now is just read a list to you so that it will cover everything that the questions had talked about. So for green matter, we want to make sure that you're using food scraps, and food scraps would be any raw kitchen vegetable waste. Again, nothing with salad dressing or sauces on it. So we call it pre-consumer. So actually before you eat it, that's what you would do. The best thing to do is to chop it into smaller pieces. The smaller the pieces, the faster it will decompose. If you have any grass clippings, make sure that they are untreated. If you have fallen leaves, don't just dump a big pile in there. Actually spread them out, and even if you could chip them up, that would even be better. Again, the smaller the pieces, the quicker it starts to break down. Plant trimmings, pine needles, soil, deadheading flowers. If you're going around and looking at your flower bed, clip off those flower heads, put those in the compost pile. Coffee grounds, you can put them inside the coffee filter as long as the coffee filter is not bleached. So if you have an unbleached coffee filter, that can go in as well. Shredded newspaper, shredded paper. If you're going to be using your mail, make sure it isn't treated with anything that has a shiny coating on it, or anything plastic. If you've got envelopes that have the plastic window in it, you can't put those in there. So remember, paper only. Wood, sawdust, and just as important is what does not go in the compost bin. Anything from the cat box or taking your dog around, you're going to take that and dispose of it in the trash. Meat scraps, so no meat products, no dairy products. Any diseased plant material, very important as we go through the season. If you see that you have a diseased plant and you're removing it from the garden bed, don't put it in the compost pile, throw it away in the trash. Coal or charcoal ashes are generally not used in the compost bin. Any magazines or newspapers is black and white only, no color. Anything that's treated with a pesticide, if you're cleaning up your yard, don't put it in the compost bin. Any invasive weeds, especially if they have seed heads on them or they're going to flower, don't put those in there. Again, the compost pile may not be hot enough to kill off those weed seeds. And as far as watering it, as I said earlier, the compost does best if it's the texture and the moistness of a wet sponge. So as you're going through and you're turning a compost pile, you'll get an idea of what it looks like. You don't want it to be soggy. If you have a soggy compost pile, it probably means that you have too much green in there, and green tends to have the moisture in it. If that's the case, take some of it out, add some brown in, mix it up. Same thing if you have a smell. It should not have a smell if you have the right components in it. Again, it's more important to have the carbon or the brown or the dry ingredients than it is to have the green ingredients. So I think that we've answered the questions for this afternoon. Have a great day.